St Monchan was a 7th century saint who founded the monastery of Lemanaghan, known today as Lemanaghan. The medieval complex here includes a principal church, a smaller church, a holy well, boulon stones and grave slabs. Today, only ruins of 2 medieval buildings remain, surrounded by a modern graveyard. Lemanaghan likely ceased as a monastery in the 13th century, becoming a parish church. St Monchan's feast day is celebrated locally on January 24th.
The area of Lemanaghan, as at present, of course, would have no comparison with what it was when the early Christians came to the area. When the early Christians came, set up a monastic site, if we were to go back in a time capsule, we probably would not recognise the area. What we do know is that it was a very heavily wooded area, parts of it. And the reason why we know that is because of the place names. Lemanaghan, Oakwood of the Hounds. Derrynaville, Oakwood of the Animals. There is Derrynlot, Oakwood of the Lakes. And Derravan, Middle Oakwood. So there's a lot of oak woods around the area. And then with the fertile soil, the woodlands, and the abundance of wildlife on the bog, is a very attractive place for people to come and settle. And they probably entered Lemanaghan through the old Brosna River. There was a ford found there back about 1890s, near the river actually. So that would have come across the bog as well, because there's tracks across the bog, and they know from archaeological digs, there's several, it's densely populated with archaeological sites.
I can't emphasize that enough actually. It's one of the richest areas for archaeological finds in the whole country. It's incredible, not just material from the medieval period, but material going back right into the prehistoric period. But obviously, the landscape would have been a more wooded landscape. So you'd have woods and bogs, and it would look, quite different than it does today. There's a beautiful poem actually written by, or supposedly written by, the saint himself, and describing the ideal monastery, and that kind of, I suppose, conjures up an image of maybe what the monastery would have looked like at the time.
The poem I'm about to read to you is Monchan's Wish. It was written by St Monaghan in the 7th century, and it would have been originally written in Gaelic. And the version I'm going to do was translated by Thomas Kinsella, the great Irish poet, and this is loosely based on his translation. So it's Monchan's Wish, written by St Monaghan, 7th century. O Son of the living God, ancient eternal King, grant me a hidden hut to be my home in the wild, with green shadow water running by its side, and a clear pool to wash off sin by grace of the Holy Ghost. A lovely wood close by, around it on every hand, to feed the birds of many voices, to shelter them and hide. Southward facing for warmth, with a stream in its grounds, and choice land of thick growth, good for every crop. Some sensible disciples, their number I will fix, modest and obedient, praying to the King. 4 times 3 or 3 times 4, correct for every need. 2 sides within the church, on the north side and the south. 6 pairs beside myself, gathered all about me, praying for all eternity to the King who lights the sun. A lovely church with linen, a home for heaven's King, with bright lamps shining down on the clean, bright scriptures. And a special house to go to for minding of the body, with no lust or luxury or any harmful thought. And the things that I will have there and tend there for certain are hens, fresh and fragrant leeks, bees and speckled salmon. Ample food and raiment for the King of fairest fame, and I seated somewhere praying to God a while.
Peat harvesting near Lemanaghan has revealed many archaeological finds, an early medieval crozier, human bones and numerous tohers, wooden trackways across the bog dating to the 7th century. One of these is the 750-metre long tower connecting Lemanaghan to the east. It was initially a 1 metre wide oak walkway dated to the 7th century. This tower was built upon over the centuries, culminating in an impressive 4.2 metre wide tower by the 12th century, possibly constructed to accommodate pilgrim traffic to the shrine of St. Moncon.
They're able to date the wood of those roadways because of the oak planks that they're using for them, and they're able to get really accurate dates, you know. So we know in particular that large one now that goes out to Lemanaghan, you know, there's 4 phases of that. It starts in the earliest phase starts in the early 7th century, and you know, it's kind of expanded, and you know, it's not a trackway. In its I think the 3rd phase, it's like 4.2 meters wide. So it's a roadway, you know. That's and you know, I suppose that would have facilitated also pilgrim traffic coming to the monastery.
Now, if I could just very briefly describe to you the area, the present-day area of Lemanaghan. Now, it's rich in mineral soil. It's about 3 miles, a little bit 3.5 miles, square miles. And it's, of course, surrounded by bog. And to the east and southeast is the callow lands, which are adjacent to the River Brosna. Now, back up to 1947 or that, the callows used to flood, and the farmers would get their hay made before the flood, and they would see the flood coming up the callow. It's called a white horse if the weather was bad. And before the white horse damaged their hay, they would draw the hay to higher ground. And this higher ground was called the Hill of Licking, which means it's a sort of a plateau, higher, about so many feet above the water level. So it was quite a lot of hardship at that time. But the river was dredged and streamlined because it was zigzagged and snaked across the area from east to down south. So that transformed the callow land. But as I said to you before, the upland is a mineral soil and it's very good for farming. Except for dairy farming, as you're probably aware, there is no dairy farming in Lemanaghan, and you'll probably hear the reason for that later on.
Well, I grew up in a time where there wasn't, you know, in my childhood there was no social media, and you didn't have those connections with people during the summer. So you were very much, your summer holidays was with your family and maybe your extended family, cousins or whatever. You have your days in the bog, you have your flask of tea and your sandwiches, and you'd be looking to the sky to see how much daylight is left, you know. That would be your clock. Or you went home and you got hungry, you know. That was kind of the way it was. You did your footing of your turf and jumped drains, and you know, inevitably somebody would catch a frog and terrify somebody else, and you had all of those memories, which I suppose now are quite special because time has moved on and it was so innocent, you know, and it was you took for granted what you were really doing is supplying the house with fuel. You didn't really think of it like that. It was, I suppose, you know, when you got on a bit older, it was something that you probably dreaded doing. It was always hard work. And
well, as a child, I think we went down with great intentions of doing great work, but then like you get kind of distracted with maybe you know, bog lizards or frogs, or you know, like this is going back when you were a small child, so you know, like you didn't really do a whole lot, to be honest. And we were, suppose, lucky in a sense that we were very close to the bog, so we could go home and, you know, get something to eat or have a cup of tea or whatever. Like you were only 5 minutes down the road, like, so it was grand that way. Where you hear people bringing bottles of tea and, you know, sandwiches and all that kind of thing. We didn't really have to do that, but yeah, it was, you could just kind of disappear. Just your mum and dad would be, you know, in the thick of it, not really watching, and you could just slope off.
There's nobody going to the work on the bog anymore. They pass by here up by our place from about 1952 up to a year ago. That was a sod bog one time.
What's a sod bog, Paddy?
Cutting turf.
Okay.
They cut turf with the machine. They cut it with a small machine first, the lily put, and then they worked the bagger. She was working on three 8-hour shifts.
Okay. That's a lot of turf.
Oh, a lot of turf. No, there's not a sod out there now. Of course, it's mill peat that lasts 15 or 20 years.
I was working with my uncle at the start of summer. The first week, I was footing turf. That's like what most young lads do. They foot turf or like go be a farmhand or something.
Can you tell us what footing turf is?
It's when when it's cut it's all wet.
It's all in rows.
Yeah.
And
so
when it dries, then they take up the sods and they cross them, zigzag.
Yeah, and it's stacked up in a little tower like that.
Oh, my children do it. Actually, I have a son lined up tomorrow to go to the bog. This is the ritual that goes on. You just have to have that experience. So my youngest is 14. All of my kids have been on the bog. He has a job lined up himself. He's heading off to do turf for a guy the other side of the bog. So cash, cha-ching.
An uncle of mine told me about back in the 20s in the troubled times when the black and tans were roving through the countryside, creating all classes of deprivation. The tans came and they would take all the horses from the farmers if they had horses and gather them all up and confiscate them. But an uncle of mine, he had 2 horses and he brought them right out into the middle of the bog. There was a little area or green area up on the top of the bog at the back of his house. And when you'd be up there and that it was a little lower, the bog was raised above it. And he could get the horses in there and hide them until the tans were gone. And at one stage he had to do that, lead the horses into the bog. So they came around, there was no sign of a horse.
I think a sense of place is very important. And one of the reasons why I kept coming back to Lemanaghan was I had very high regard for my roots. And I think it gave me a focal during my whole life. So I think keeping the Monaghan's tradition upheld going into the future, I would like to see that done. And the practice of not selling milk and visiting St. Monaghan's Well every Friday and having their Mass on St. Monaghan's Feast Day, which is the 24th of January every year. I think those things are very important. I think the simple things in life are what matter and things we can often take for granted.